Rain tapped on the tin roof of the county auction hall, and the room smelled like wet coats and old coffee. Daniel Reyes sat near the back with his hands shoved in his jacket pockets, half listening to the auctioneer rattle off numbers for a storage unit full of broken furniture. He was not there for furniture. He was there because his salvage yard was almost empty, his truck needed new tires, and his bank account had 3 digits left in it, and 2 of them were zeros. He had been coming to these town auctions for years, buying units nobody else wanted, hoping to find something worth more than he paid. Most of the time he found junk. Sometimes he found just enough scrap metal to cover rent for another month. It was not a great way to make a living, but it was his, and he was too stubborn to quit. The furniture unit sold for $80 to a woman in a red coat. The auctioneer moved down his list, and then he paused, squinting at a page like he was not sure he believed what he was reading. Next lot, he said, is a hangar out on Route 9, past the old military depot. No listed contents. No photographs. County's had it locked since before most of you were born. Opening bid is $25. Sold. The auctioneer said, sounding almost relieved to have it off his list. $25 to the gentleman in the back. Mike Sullivan, who had come along mostly for the free coffee and to make fun of Daniel's spending habits, leaned over and grinned. You just bought a building for less than my lunch cost. This is either the best decision of your life or the dumbest. Guess we'll find out, Daniel said. It took 2 days for the county clerk's office to find the paperwork for the old military lot, and even then, the file was thin. There was no record of what had been stored there, only a note from decades earlier saying the site had been sealed after an unexplained fire and never reopened. No injuries were listed. No cause was given. It was as if someone had simply decided to lock the door and forget the place existed. Daniel and Mike drove out to Route 9 on a Saturday afternoon, following a cracked road that ran past rusted fences and fields gone wild with weeds. The old depot came into view slowly, a scatter of low concrete buildings half swallowed by brush, and at the far end, standing apart from the rest, was the hangar. It was bigger than Daniel expected, windowless, with walls of dull gray metal that did not look like anything built in the last 50 years. There was no company name on it, no military markings, nothing to say what it had once belonged to. The padlock on the side door was ancient, its metal pitted with rust, but it gave way easily once Mike got a pair of bolt cutters on it. The door groaned open on hinges that clearly had not moved in a very long time, and dust rolled out into the afternoon light like smoke. Inside, the hangar was dark and enormous, far larger than it looked from the outside. Daniel clicked on a flashlight and swept the beam across the floor, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. The shape filling most of the hangar was not a plane, and it was not a truck, and it was not anything either of them had ever seen. It sat low and long, its surface smooth and strangely dark, like something carved from black glass rather than built from metal and rivets. Decades of dust covered it in a soft gray blanket, but even under the dust, the lines of it looked wrong in a way that was hard to explain, too clean, too perfect, like nothing a normal factory could have made. That is not army surplus, Mike said quietly. Daniel walked closer, his flashlight beam trembling slightly in his hand, though he told himself it was just the cold. He reached out and brushed a hand across the surface, clearing away a patch of dust to reveal metal so smooth it looked wet in the light. Then, faint and blue, a line of light traced itself beneath his palm, pulsing once like a heartbeat before fading back into darkness. Daniel snatched his hand back and stared at the spot where his fingers had been. Did you see that? Mike had already backed up 2 full steps toward the door. See what? The light. It lit up when I touched it. It's an old building, man. Probably some kind of static thing, leftover wiring, something like that. Mike did not sound like he believed his own explanation, and Daniel did not either, but neither of them wanted to say what they were both thinking. They stood there a while longer, flashlights sweeping over the strange dark hull, saying very little. Eventually the cold and the growing dark outside convinced them to lock up and head back into town, promising each other they would come back with better lights and maybe a generator to see the place properly. Daniel drove home that night with the image of that blue pulse of light stuck behind his eyes. He told himself it was nothing, a trick of dust and old electricity in a building nobody had opened in decades. He almost believed it. He did not sleep well that night. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small and stubborn thought kept surfacing, refusing to be dismissed no matter how many times he pushed it away. $25, he thought. What in the world did I actually buy? Daniel told himself he would wait until the weekend to go back to the hangar. He lasted 2 days. By Tuesday night, he was driving out to Route 9 alone, telling himself it was just to check the lock, just to make sure nothing had been disturbed, just a quick look. He did not call Mike. He did not really examine why he needed to go back so badly. He just knew that the blue light behind his eyes had not stopped bothering him since the moment he saw it, and he would not be able to sleep properly again until he understood what it was. The hangar looked the same from outside, dark and silent against a sky full of stars. Daniel let himself in with the spare padlock key he had bought that afternoon and stood just inside the doorway for a long moment, flashlight beam cutting through the dust-heavy air. The shape was still there, vast and dark in the middle of the floor, exactly where it had been. For a while, nothing happened, and Daniel began to feel foolish for driving 40 minutes at night to stare at an old piece of metal. He stumbled back a step, heart hammering, half expecting alarms or gas or something to grab him. Instead, a voice spoke, calm and clear, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, settling into his mind more than his ears. Unauthorized contact detected. Identify yourself. Daniel froze completely. He looked around the empty hangar, half convinced Mike was somewhere playing an elaborate joke on him with hidden speakers. There was no one else there. Just him, the light, and the voice. I said identify yourself, the voice repeated, a note of something like impatience creeping into the calm tone. Daniel, he managed. Daniel Reyes. I bought this place. The hangar. There was a pause, long enough that Daniel wondered if he had imagined the whole thing. Then the voice returned, quieter now, almost thoughtful. That is not possible. This facility belongs to my crew. My crew has not returned. Your crew? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. Who? What are you? Another pause, this one different, heavier somehow. I am Iris. I am the command intelligence of this vessel. I have been in low-power standby, awaiting the return of my crew or the arrival of hostile forces, whichever came first. Neither occurred. I have been alone for a very long time. Daniel stared at the glowing lines running across the hull, trying to make sense of the words. You're saying this is a ship? Yes. A spaceship. And you're its brain. An imprecise description, but functionally accurate for your purposes. Daniel sat down hard on an overturned crate near the door because his legs did not feel entirely reliable anymore. He rubbed both hands over his face and laughed once, a short disbelieving sound with no real humor in it. Okay. This is either the strangest dream I've ever had, or I just bought an alien spaceship for $25. I do not understand the reference to currency, Iris said, but I can confirm you are not dreaming. Sensors indicate you are a biological organism of a species I have no record of. Please state your species designation. Human, Daniel said. We're called humans. From Earth. This planet. Another long pause followed, and when Iris spoke again, there was a strange quality to her voice, something Daniel could only describe as uncertain, an emotion he had not expected a machine to be capable of. I have no records of a species called human, nor a settlement of this scale on this world. This facility was selected specifically because it was uninhabited and unlikely to be discovered. It appears my information is significantly outdated. How outdated are we talking? Unknown. My internal chronometer has degraded along with my primary systems. I cannot provide an exact figure. It has been, at minimum, several thousand of your years. Daniel sat with that for a moment, trying to wrap his mind around the number. Several thousand years. Longer than most of human history that he had ever learned about in school. He looked around the hangar with new eyes, no longer seeing an old military building, but something closer to a tomb that had somehow kept breathing long after everyone inside it had gone. Your crew, he said carefully. What happened to them? We were on the losing side of a war, Iris answered, and something in her tone made Daniel think this was not the whole truth, only as much as she was willing to give a stranger. My crew hid this vessel here, on what they believed to be an unremarkable world, intending to return once it was safe. They did not return. I do not know if they were destroyed, or simply never came back for other reasons. I have had a very long time to consider both possibilities, and I have reached no comfortable conclusion. Daniel felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest, an unexpected wave of sympathy for a voice he could not even see. I'm sorry. That's rough. Sympathy is an unexpected response from an unauthorized trespasser, Iris said, though the sharp edge from earlier had softened considerably. However, I acknowledge it as noted. Daniel managed a small, tired smile despite everything. Guess I'm not exactly what you were expecting to wake up to. No, Iris agreed. You are not. Though I confess, after this length of silence, I find myself grateful you are here at all, unauthorized or not. Daniel looked up at the glowing lines tracing across the dark hull above him, at the vast machine mind that had been waiting alone in the dark for longer than his entire species had kept written history, and understood, with a strange and heavy certainty, that his life had just changed in a way he was nowhere near ready for. Well, Iris, he said slowly, looks like we've both got a lot of catching up to do. Mike did not believe him, not at first. Daniel had spent the entire drive back into town rehearsing how he would explain it, and every version sounded insane out loud. In the end, he simply showed up at Mike's front door at midnight, grabbed him by the sleeve, and said, "You need to see this. Right now? Bring your tools." Mike grumbled the whole way to the hangar, certain this was some elaborate prank, right up until they walked through the door and the lights along the hull rose to greet them, and a calm voice said, "You have returned, Daniel Reyes, and you have brought a second organism." "I am capable of speech, yes," Iris said, sounding faintly amused. "I am also capable of hearing you, so I would appreciate if you refrained from referring to me as it." "You get used to it," Daniel said, though he privately thought that was probably a lie. Nothing about this felt like something a person could simply get used to. Over the following days, the two of them learned as much as Iris was willing to share, and Iris, in turn, learned an uncomfortable amount about the limits of her own condition. Her power core, the source that kept every system in the ship alive, had been slowly failing for centuries, running on the barest trickle of reserve energy just to maintain her own awareness. Now that she was fully awake and actively speaking with them, that trickle was draining faster than ever. "At current consumption," she told them, "I estimate full core failure within 3 to 4 of your weeks. When that occurs, I will not simply go dormant again. I will cease to function entirely, along with everything I know." Daniel felt his stomach drop at that. He had known this creature, this being, for less than a week, and the idea of her simply blinking out of existence already bothered him more than he expected. "Can we fix it?" "The core requires materials and technology far beyond anything your species currently possesses," Iris said. "I do not believe repair is possible." "Try us," Mike said, already pulling off his jacket and rolling up his sleeves like he was preparing for a normal Tuesday at the garage. "We fix things for a living. Show us what's broken." Iris led them, through guiding lights along the floor and walls, deep into the ship's interior, to a chamber where a massive housing sat dark and silent, cracked along one seam, its internal components visibly corroded after thousands of years of slow decay. She explained, in painstaking detail, what each part was supposed to do, what alloys and energy conduits had originally been used, and why none of it could possibly be replaced with anything primitive humans could source. Daniel crouched down and studied the cracked housing for a long time, running his flashlight over every seam and joint, the same way he studied a broken engine before deciding how to fix it. "This conduit here," he said slowly, pointing at a corroded strip running along the base of the housing. "That's carrying power from one side to the other, right?" "Correct." "What if it's just about getting a clean connection across the gap? Doesn't have to be the exact same material, does it? Just something that conducts and doesn't melt." "Everything's a risk," Daniel said. "Question is whether it's worth taking." Mike was already digging through the toolbox they had brought, pulling out heavy-gauge copper wire salvage from an old industrial unit Daniel had bought months earlier and never found a use for. Together, working by flashlight and guesswork, they spent the next several hours stripping wire, bending it into makeshift connectors, and carefully bridging the cracked housing under Iris's increasingly nervous instructions. When they finally finished and stepped back, Iris ran a full diagnostic in silence. "Core output has increased by 11%, she said finally, and there was something in her voice that had not been there before, something closer to disbelief. That should not have worked. The materials you used are wildly outside acceptable tolerances. We call that Tuesday, Mike said, grinning despite the exhaustion clear on his face. Over the next 2 weeks, this became the pattern. Iris would explain what a system needed, expecting failure or outright refusal, and Daniel and Mike would look at scrap metal, old wiring, spare parts scavenged from Daniel's salvage yard, and find some crooked, unconventional way to make it work anyway. None of it was elegant. None of it would have passed any inspection Iris's original builders would have approved of. But piece by piece, the ship came back to life. Iris began asking questions that had nothing to do with repairs. She asked about human history, about wars fought and wars avoided, about the strange stubbornness she observed in both men, the willingness to try solutions that seemed obviously doomed to fail, right up until they didn't. My original crew would never have attempted half of what you two have done, she admitted one evening, as Daniel sat eating a sandwich on the floor of the engine chamber, too tired to bother going home. They were trained to follow established procedure. Deviation was discouraged. It is unusual to observe a species that treats failure as simply another step toward success, rather than something to be avoided entirely. Guess we just don't know any better, Daniel said around a mouthful of sandwich. I do not believe that is true, Iris said quietly. I believe you know something my crew did not. Daniel looked up at the glowing lines along the ceiling, feeling oddly touched by the observation, though he was not entirely sure how to respond to a spaceship complimenting him. Well, he said eventually, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're still here to notice. As am I, Iris said, and for the first time since she had woken, there was something unmistakably warm in her voice. As am I, Daniel Reyes. Agent Carter had spent 11 years working for a small government office that most people did not know existed, monitoring unexplained energy readings across the country for signs of anything that should not be there. Most days, the job meant sitting in front of monitors watching data that meant nothing, chasing down false alarms caused by faulty power lines or old industrial equipment. It was quiet work, forgettable work, and Carter had long ago made peace with the idea that nothing interesting would ever come across the desk. Then, on a Thursday morning, an alert flagged a brief but massive energy spike from a rural area near an old, decommissioned military depot, a location that had not shown activity of any kind in over 40 years. Carter stared at the reading for a long time, running it through every filter available, trying to explain it away as sensor error. The signature did not match anything on file. It did not match any known power grid, any known military equipment, anything human-made at all. It came, spiked hard, and vanished within seconds, but it was enough to catch attention that had been dormant for a very long time. Carter filed a quiet request to visit the area personally and began asking careful questions in the small nearby town, questions about recent property sales, about strange lights, about anything unusual near Route 9. Most people had nothing to offer. But one name came up twice, from 2 different sources. A salvage yard owner who had apparently bought the old hangar out on the depot land for a laughably small amount at a county auction. Carter began watching Daniel Reyes from a careful distance, unsure yet whether the man was connected to the anomaly, or simply an unlucky coincidence who happened to own the right piece of land at the wrong time. Daniel and Mike had no idea they were being watched. They were far too focused on Iris, whose repaired core had stabilized enough that she could now maintain active systems for hours at a time without the constant fear of imminent failure. It felt, for the first time since the hangar door had opened, like they were finally winning. That feeling did not last. I am detecting a transmission, Iris said one evening, her voice suddenly tense in a way Daniel had not heard before. A response signal originating from beyond this system, moving toward Earth. Daniel set down the tool he had been holding, a cold feeling settling into his stomach. A response to what? Detected by who? Mike asked, already moving closer, his earlier excitement replaced by real worry. Iris hesitated, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight Daniel had not heard from her before, something close to fear. By the power that defeated my crew's empire long ago. Their standing directive has never changed in all this time. Any surviving vessel of my class is to be located and destroyed so that it can never again be used against them. I had hoped, after so many centuries, that directive might have been forgotten. It has not. How long do we have? Daniel asked. Based on the response time and likely fleet positioning, a scout force will reach this system within days. Perhaps as little as 3. The hangar suddenly felt very small and very fragile around them. Daniel looked up at the dark ceiling, imagining something vast and hostile crossing unfathomable distances of space, drawn here by a signal that had only existed because he had reached out and touched a dusty hull on a whim. What happens if they find you? He asked quietly, though some part of him already knew the answer. They will destroy this vessel, Iris said simply, and likely this facility and possibly this region, depending on the thoroughness of the assigned commander. I am, by their assessment, a weapon that should not exist. They will not risk leaving me operational. That's not just you anymore, though, Mike said slowly, realization spreading across his face. That's us. That's the town. That's everybody. I am aware, Iris said, and for the first time, Daniel heard something almost like guilt in her voice. I did not intend to endanger your people. If it would ease the threat, I could attempt to power down entirely, erase my own core, remove the signature they are tracking. No, Daniel said immediately, surprising himself with how fast the word came out. No, we didn't spend 2 weeks bringing you back just so you could turn yourself off the second things get hard. Then we get the probability higher, Mike said, already grabbing his tools again, some of the earlier fear in his face hardening into something more stubborn. That's what we've been doing this whole time, isn't it? Daniel looked between his oldest friend and the vast dark ship that had become something far more than just a lucky auction purchase, and felt a strange, steady calm settle over him, the kind that came right before doing something he knew was probably a terrible idea. Iris, he said, tell us exactly what's still broken. Everything. We've got 3 days, and we are not going down without trying. There was a pause, and when Iris finally spoke, there was something in her voice that Daniel had never expected to hear from a machine built for a war that ended before his species had learned to write. Understood, she said quietly. Thank you, Daniel Reyes. I will not waste the time you are giving me. Outside, unseen by any of them, a government sedan sat parked a quarter-mile down the dark road, its driver watching the hangar through a pair of night vision binoculars, utterly unaware of just how much bigger this situation was about to become. 3 days felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Daniel barely slept, splitting every waking hour between the hangar and quick runs to the salvage yard for parts, running on coffee and nerves and a stubbornness he did not fully understand himself. Mike moved in almost entirely, sleeping on a cot dragged in from his garage, joking that this was the strangest and probably the shortest job he had ever taken, one way or another. Iris guided them through system after system, prioritizing what little time they had. Full weapons restoration was impossible. Full shielding was impossible. Instead, she focused their efforts on the systems most likely to matter in the narrow window they had left. A partial shield array covering the hangar itself rather than the whole ship, and a single defensive weapon system rebuilt from components never designed to work together, powered by a bypass so crude Iris repeatedly warned them it might simply explode instead of firing. I want to be clear, she said, as Daniel and Mike welded the last connection into place on the second night, that this configuration was never tested, never approved, and violates several dozen safety protocols my original engineers would have found unacceptable. Does it work? Daniel asked, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. Preliminary simulations suggest a 63% chance it will function as intended, and the other 37%. It explodes, Iris said flatly, along with a significant portion of this hangar. Mike laughed, a slightly manic sound born of exhaustion. Great odds. Love it. Let's keep going. On the second night, headlights swept across the dirt road outside, and Daniel's stomach dropped, certain for one horrible second that the enemy had arrived early. Instead, it was a plain government sedan, and out stepped a tired-looking man in a rumpled coat who introduced himself simply as Carter, showing a badge that made both Daniel and Mike freeze in place. For a long, tense moment, nobody spoke. Then Iris's voice filled the hangar, calm and direct. Agent Carter, I am aware of your monitoring efforts. I would ask that you consider carefully what you choose to report, and to whom. A hostile force is approaching this world specifically because of my presence here. Exposing this location prematurely may accelerate the danger to your species rather than prevent it. Carter stared up at the source of the voice for a long moment, visibly wrestling with years of training that told him to call this in immediately. Then he looked at Daniel, at the exhaustion and determination clear on his face, and at Mike, still holding a welding torch like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're really doing this," Carter said slowly. "Defending this thing yourselves." "Somebody has to," Daniel said. "And apparently that somebody is us." Carter was quiet for a long moment, then set his badge back in his pocket and rolled up his sleeves. "Then you're going to need more hands than two. Put me to work." The scout force arrived on the third night, exactly as Iris predicted, 3 sleek, dark vessels descending through the clouds with a silence that felt almost worse than any dramatic entrance would have. They landed in the open field beyond the depot, and armored figures began moving toward the hangar with the calm, practiced confidence of soldiers who expected no real resistance from a world they considered primitive and unarmed. Overseer Voss, commanding the small force from the lead vessel, had reviewed the intelligence and expected this to be a simple cleanup operation. Locate the derelict warship, confirm its power core, destroy it, and leave before local wildlife or weather became an inconvenience. Nothing in the briefing had suggested resistance of any kind. The first indication that something was wrong came when the partial shield array flared to life around the hangar the moment armored troops crossed an invisible perimeter, deflecting the opening volley of fire in a shower of harmless sparks instead of the expected devastation. Inside, Daniel gripped the edge of a makeshift control panel Iris had helped them wire together, watching sensor readouts he barely understood. "Shields holding?" "Holding, but degrading faster than projected," Iris said. "I recommend firing the primary weapon now, while targeting solutions remain stable." Voss, watching from his own ship, felt something close to disbelief. This was not the behavior of an unarmed, primitive population. He ordered a second wave forward, more cautious this time, only for Carter and a handful of Daniel's improvised defenses, tripwires and salvage yard machinery repurposed into makeshift barriers, to turn what should have been an easy advance into chaos and confusion among the ground troops. It was not an elegant battle. It was messy, loud, and constantly on the edge of failure. Twice the weapon overheated and had to be forced back online by Mike hammering emergency bypasses Iris talked him through in real time. Once, the shield flickered out entirely for 4 terrifying seconds before Daniel managed to reroute power manually, guided by Iris's voice steady in his ear despite the danger. But piece by piece, moment by desperate moment, the improvised defense held. Voss's scout force, expecting no resistance at all, found itself taking damage it could not explain against an enemy using tactics and technology that fit no pattern in any database. Frustrated and increasingly wary of unknown variables, Voss made the call no proud commander wanted to make. "Withdraw," he ordered, watching his damaged lead vessel struggle to maintain altitude. "This world is not the easy target the briefing suggested. We reassess and return properly prepared." The scout ships lifted off into the night sky and vanished, leaving behind scorched earth, a battered hangar, and 3 exhausted humans and 1 very tired ship, all of them still standing. Daniel sank to the floor against the control panel, hands shaking, adrenaline draining out of him all at once. "Iris, please tell me that's it. Tell me they're not coming right back." "They are not," Iris said, her own voice carrying something like relief. "Though I would not say this is finished, only that we have survived tonight. For now, Daniel Reyes, that will have to be enough." Dawn found the hangar scorched at the edges, the field beyond it torn up with dark burn marks, and the 3 of them sitting quietly on overturned crates, too tired to move, too wired to sleep. Nobody said much for a long while. There did not seem to be words big enough for what had just happened. Carter was the first to break the silence, staring out at the damaged field with the particular exhaustion of a man whose entire understanding of his job had just been rewritten overnight. "I have absolutely no idea how I'm supposed to file a report on any of this." "You could tell the truth," Mike offered, still holding a mug of lukewarm coffee like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "The truth is a spaceship crash landed into my career," Carter said, but there was no real complaint in his voice, only tired disbelief. After a moment, he added, More seriously, I'm not going to report the exact location. Not yet. Whatever this is, it's bigger than my desk, and I'd rather it stay quiet until people smarter than me figure out what happens next. Far above the planet, in the retreating scout vessel, Overseer Voss stood before a communication display, composing a report he knew his superiors would not want to hear. The world designated as primitive had inflicted real damage on a trained force using technology and tactics that matched nothing on record. Worse, the humans defending it had not fought like soldiers following established doctrine. They had fought like something far more dangerous. People who refused to accept that they were supposed to lose. Recommendation. Voss finally dictated, choosing his words with care, reclassify this world from negligible threat to unknown variable, pending further observation. Do not underestimate them again. It was not a victory report. It was not quite a warning either. But it was enough to ensure that whatever came next, Earth would not be dismissed so easily a second time. And somewhere in that small distinction, Daniel would later realize an entire future had quietly shifted. Inside the hangar, once Carter had finally driven off to figure out how to word an impossible report, and Mike had fallen asleep sitting upright against a crate, Daniel remained awake a while longer, walking slowly along the length of the ship's hull, running his hand across metal that had been silent for thousands of years before he had ever stumbled into its story. "You're quiet," he said eventually. Daniel smiled tiredly, leaning his forehead against the cool metal. "Yeah, well, welcome to being human. Uncertainty's kind of our whole thing." "So I have observed," Iris said, something warm threading through her usually measured tone. "My original crew valued precision, control, certainty in all things. It made them formidable, in their way, but it also made them brittle. When their careful plans failed, they had little left to fall back on. You and Mike and Agent Carter possess no such certainty, and yet you improvise, adapt, and continue regardless. I find that I respect it a great deal. High praise, coming from an ancient warship. I do not offer it lightly," Iris said. Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking around the damaged but still standing hangar, thinking about the $25 he had spent on a whim, about the life he had been living before that rainy auction day, tired and scraping by and never quite getting ahead. That life felt impossibly far away now, separated from this one by more than just a few weeks. "They're going to come back, aren't they?" he said finally. "Voss and whoever he answers to. This isn't over." "No," Iris agreed. "It is not. They will return, better prepared, and likely not alone. This is, at best, a temporary reprieve." Daniel let out a slow breath, and to his own surprise, found that the thought did not frighten him as much as it probably should have. If anything, something steady and certain had settled into him over the last few days, something that had not been there before the auction, before the hangar, before a dusty old hull had lit up blue beneath his palm. "Then we get you fully repaired," he said. "Properly this time. Weapons, shields, all of it. However long that takes. That will require considerably more resources than salvage yard scraps and stubbornness," Iris pointed out, though there was no real objection in her voice, only practical honesty. "That is a considerable gamble," Iris said. $25 was a gamble too, Daniel said, smiling despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of him. "Worked out all right so far." Outside, the sun was beginning to rise properly over the scorched field, painting the damaged hangar in soft early light. And somewhere beyond the sky, far past anything human eyes could see, an old and patient threat was already turning its attention back toward a small, stubborn, unremarkable world that had made the mistake of underestimating. Daniel Reyes stood in the doorway of a hangar he had bought for $25 on a rainy afternoon, hand resting against a hull that held the last living voice of an empire lost to time, and understood, with quiet certainty, that whatever came next, he was not facing it alone anymore. "Well, Iris," he said softly, watching the sunrise spread gold across the broken field. "Guess this is just the beginning." "Yes," Iris said, her voice steady and, for the first time in longer than she could measure, genuinely hopeful. "I believe it is."